So there are no debts on the IMF. So what I foresee, and I might be wrong, I foresee a Euro 2 scenario. That's how I call it. What happened why did they started the euro? That is because if the euro would not have been created, the southern countries would already have failed.
Thursday, May 6, 2021, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Brecht Arnaert. I spoke with Brecht just over a year ago in April of 2020. And Brecht had invited me to talk at a conference in Breda, Holland, last year in March to talk about the bond market. Unfortunately, that had to be canceled because of the so-called crisis that we have. And so I interviewed him in April about central banking, about the ECB. Brecht, he's the editor of Macrotrends.be. It's a Belgian financial newsletter, but he's also much more than that. And so I'll let Brecht introduce himself and tell you a little more about himself.
Okay, Mario, thank you for the invitation to speak again. I can't believe it's a year has passed. Time goes so fast. People who have seen the earlier video already know a bit about me. I am the chief editor of Macrotrends.be. We are a Brussels-based newsletter focused on preserving capital, very conservative, and I try to apply Austrian economics, so the economics of Mises and Hayek and Rothbard, to investing. And besides that, I'm doing a PhD with the famous Dr. Jesus Huerta de Soto Ballester, which to my mind is one of the biggest authorities on everything that has to do with fractional reserve banking, inflation, deflation, all the monetary stuff. So basically, that is what I do.
So you're in Madrid, right?
Yeah. At my roof terrace here, it's 22 degrees. I hear in the rest of Europe, it's the weather is worse. But hey, that's one of the perks of living in the south.
Yeah, and you're doing your PhD now as well in Madrid,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, in Austrian economics, and I focus on methodology above all, because the way we look at economics has a lot to do with our philosophical preconceptions. So if you look at the economy as a machine, for instance, then the logical consequence is that the people that are running the economy see themselves as social engineers. So the machine doesn't work, so we have to replace a part. And so they see themselves as like at the steering wheel of the economy. And the Austrian view is totally different. That says that the economy is not a machine, it is an organism. And an organism composed of millions of microorganisms, which we call human beings. So we could see ourselves as the bacteria of the gut of the economy, let's say. So that is how Austrian economics looks at these things. And so what I try to do is to make explicit the false assumptions in present day economics so that we could have a shift to more realistic assumptions about how entrepreneurship works, how price discovery works, and point out what we shouldn't do.
Yeah, I guess you could consider the Keynesians then an artificial remedy to run the economy, a little bit like what they're trying to force on us. And I'm not going to say the word. So the Keynesians are the V, and the Austrian school promotes organic economics, I would say. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, there's a lot to talk about, but let's start with what you said in a recent interview, which was really interesting. And I'm going to put it in the description and also in the cards above with a Belgian fellow called Philip van Houten. He has a YouTube channel. I recommend people watch that as well. And you were talking about the coming financial crisis, and you talked about in that interview about the Asian crisis and how actually the Asian countries came out really strong after the collapse in 97, 98. Can you go over that a little bit?
Yeah. So when you research the many ways that governments could react to a crisis, there are two big categories. One would be a crisis is something bad and we have to prevent it at all costs. And that is what the West is doing now. We paper it over, we inject more liquidities, and then the crisis can never come. But this is like a person who has taken drugs to be able to dance all night. And then in the morning, of course, you're down. That will be the crisis. And you say, no, let's take another ecstasy pill, and then you can dance on. But of course, this is robbing your biocapital, your natural flow of energy. You're taking advances from the future to the present. The other way to do it is to say, well, the crisis is actually not the illness. That is, a crisis is not something bad. Crisis comes from the Greek verb krinein. Krinein means to make a distinction. And so what a crisis actually is the moment where people start making the distinction between what is really real and what has been a fiction. And so the Asian countries in 97, they were in a bubble for almost 10 years. And the bubble, if you're long enough in a bubble, that seems like the new normal. So if you go into a turn, and if the turn is slow enough, like 1 degree, you go slow enough in it, you think that's the new normal until, of course, krinein, until you distinguish this cannot go on any longer. And so the second response is to not try to prevent the crisis, but to welcome it, because that will recalibrate the economy in such a way that it will become much more efficient. And so applied to that crisis, it is highly, strange that the policies that they wanted to apply for that crisis, like South Korea, Japan, the Asian tigers, was to paper it over. And then the IMF said, no, you're not going to do that. You have to let the crisis come. And what was the result? There were 2.5 to 3 years of hardships, but hardships that you can manage if you have a social security system. That's no problem. But the economy readjusted, and all the biggest brands that we have nowadays in our garages and in our homes, like Samsung and Hyundai and all the real competitors to the American companies now, have been born from that crisis. In the West, this is the strange thing. The IMF does not take the stance that it took in 97. It just lets governments paper it over, and Christine Lagarde coming from the IMF is like the guarantee to keep on printing. And this is really strange. And I've read papers by Asian economists really wondering why are you even doing that? So these are two ways to deal with it. And I'm convinced that the hard way, the short way, not papering it over, but let the crisis happen is the best way.
Yeah, I remember that crisis well. I was working in the city at the time. I worked for a Dutch bank, ABN AMRO at the time, and it all started in Thailand with the Thai baht collapsing, and then it spread like a domino. And I remember we used to do futures for some funds, and we used to do indices in Kuala Lumpur, and that market was actually shut down. You couldn't have foreign investors. And I think it was Mr. Mahathir, the president at the time.
Yes.
He closed off the country to foreign capital. People criticized him, but it actually, Malaysia did really well afterwards. So, yes, unfortunately, in the West, we've been papering over these crises for so long now that it's going to be really a bad hangover, don't you think? If eventually, because we can't keep going forever.
I think it's mathematically inevitable that the story of the hare and the tortoise. So whenever you try to paper it over, you only make more certain the crash. So in investing, there is always this, you have to weigh certainty with profit. And so if you take a lot of risk, you might get a lot of profits, but you don't know. But the beauty as an investor for me is that this crisis is so incredibly certain, and it gets more certain every day, that the positioning you take with your portfolio, you don't really have to worry about how it's going to end. I know for a fact, I'm being too certain now, but I 99% of my gut says, central banks have been buying gold for the last 5 to 6 years. They are not doing that because, it's just some random idea. No, they do know that, the system cannot go any further. And if you look at the lady, her name escapes me now, of the Bank of International Settlements, who actually said it is Bretton Woods time. She literally used those words.
Is that the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva?
Yes, the Russian lady. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, it's not.
I think she's Bulgarian. I think she is.
Yeah. She's not from the Bank of International Settlements, but yes. So these are very, very clear cues, and in everyday language, they would not be very clear. But if you know the language of diplomacy, even a small touch in a certain direction creates a path dependency for the debates that will follow. So they are preparing a new monetary system. And then the question will be, what will be the basis? And I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that.
Sure.
I think that the basis will not be a unilateral world reserve currency as we have now. So now we have the dollar. The dollar is American, and America rules the world. I think what Putin said in his last 5 addresses to the nation is that we want a multipolar world. And of course, there's a lot of hypocrisy in that, because Putin and the Chinese, everybody wants to rule the world, but they know that the balances are not in favor of one. There is polarity, and they have to make a compromise. So what I think will happen is that we will have a weighted currency on the basis of the IMF, because they have the SDR in place, so the special drawing rights. That is an instrument that exists nowadays since '69, and the IMF is the only international institution that has a clean balance sheet. So there are no debts on the IMF. So what I foresee, and I might be wrong, I foresee a Euro 2 scenario. That's how I call it. What happened why did they started the euro? That is because if the euro would not have been created, the southern countries would already have failed. Italy had gigantic debts, Spain the same, Portugal, all the southern countries. If you make a melting pot of all of that, then the implicit guarantee of Germany and the northern countries makes interest rates go down, and that is what you want to get the system going again. So what happened in Euroland, let's say, can now be implemented on a global scale. It is perfectly feasible to take all of the American sovereign debt, all of the European sovereign debt, maybe some African debt, but that is largely French debt because of the French monetary system that has its extensions there. I will not go into that. But actually, if you have those 3, even without China, you can have a world reserve currency that is multipolar and based on the SDR. And then the question is, what is the backing value of the SDR? And that is very simple. That will be gold. Not exclusively gold, but for instance, 20% gold. And the rest is then, the backing value is the prestige of, prestige is a backing value. People don't realize that. I think that is where things are going. So I, as an investor, if you don't have precious metals now, you don't understand anything about what is happening.
So what about people who talk about cryptocurrencies? Do you have any view in that? People are saying that Bitcoin is going to be used. No. I just don't see that.
No, I there's how how to say this. We don't even know what the origins are of Bitcoin, and I do not trust anything that I cannot pinpoint the origins. For instance, we advised Bitcoin with Macrotrends at $5 in 2013. We made a killing, but I always said to my subscribers, take profits early on because you never know where this is going to go. And I was wrong. It went up a lot more. So I think they went 100 times 100. And then we said take profits. I should have waited and said nothing. But this is clearly not a stable, a stable medium of exchange. It is not a medium of exchange. It is a bubble. And there's a lot of romanticism about, this is going to be the new monetary system. And then I ask my subscribers who think that, do you really think that the central bankers in the world would allow, just like that, to have their monopoly of printing money to be taken away by some crypto stuff? And then they are like a bit shocked, and they say, well, you have to reckon that power wants more power, and it will never want an alternative. And so that is why the central banks themselves, who are seeing this evolution, are creating their own cryptocurrencies. Like the Chinese already have their own cryptocurrency. They know that the payment system, the technology behind that, is good, but they will never allow the fiscal slaves to escape into their own monetary realm. That is a fiction.
Just wanted to say that even though Brecht believes we could have a new multipolar IMF-run SDR currency backed by gold, he's not a proponent of that. He's just telling us what he believes will happen, because Brecht is a true believer in individual freedom. And maybe we could segue into that right now, individual freedom, and why you think it's so important. And just before you go further, I saw the other day that India has been buying a lot of gold now, not just the Indian housewives, but the Indian government, and they've got the biggest holdings of gold. I think it's 640 metric tons. It's the biggest holding since India's became independent. But the West isn't buying gold. It seems to be just the East that's buying gold. Is that because they didn't have as much gold and they have to catch up with the West? So if you could answer that, talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go into individual freedom and human freedom.
Yeah. What the reasons are that the East is catching up with the West buying gold, it's hard to say. What I do know is that all central banks are united in Basel, in the Bank of International Settlements, and we do not have to be naive. There are no states there. We think about the French and the Dutch and the Germans. They don't. They see themselves as an international elite that should rule the world from their perspective. And so it is quite possible, I wouldn't say likely, I don't know what to think about it, what is the probability, that they made an agreement to have the gold, dispersed evenly in the world. So when the day comes that the new SDR-backed, gold-backed currency comes about, and this idea comes from Keynes, the Bancor, then you have the Phoenix, you have a lot of ideas about that when the day comes, that everybody has its ticket. And I call gold, I call it the coin for the ferryman. So the romanticists think that, this monetary system is going to crash and then we will have total freedom. No, the elite knows that it is going to crash, and they have already built a new system. And so the only nation I see as outside of that is actually China. I think China, because of its very long history, it has thousands of years of history, and they're very conscious about their place in the world. I see them as the only real force against what you could call the New World Order, not even Putin, because if you think about it, the Russian economy is the size of the Italian economy. It's a huge country, but it plays above its, above its boxing weight. So I don't know the reason for India, for instance, is also a player, but they are more oriented to the West. They're not like China. They're very integrated into Western thinking, although they are part of the BRICS. But hey, let's look at the BRICS. I was expecting a lot from that, but I don't see any real initiatives to really challenge the hegemony of the West. So I don't have the answers there. I see tendencies, but I cannot pinpoint what is happening.
So you actually think China is not part of this New World Order agenda? Because a lot of people think they're leading it.
Like in America, if I look at American media, I see this anguish about China, and then there are exercises at the Canadian border with Chinese troops, and that is almost like China is going to invade, the U.S. And there's this frenzy about China, and I think it has to do with the electoral cycle that the U.S. went through. But if you read about how China is, for instance, communism, the idea of Russian communism is not the same as Chinese communism. China always had a certain disregard for individual liberties. This is not new for a Chinese person to not see himself as an individual. They don't think like the West. They are, in a sense, more holistic, and they accept that. That they are being ruled. There are cultural factors that make it so that the New World Order for them is like, what is that? They cannot even relate to that, and it is very hard to know if something is part of the New World Order or not. We will never know. These might be shadow boxing. I have read, for instance, that the Rockefellers have very strong ties with the Lee family. But the Lee family is several millions people are called Lee. So whenever you try to pinpoint relations within China, it's like a black box. You don't know what is happening. And so I'm undecided, but on a cultural level, I think that they are not cooperating towards that New World Order. They want to be the new leader in the next century, and look at them. They have a good chance. Napoleon said, "Beware when the dragon awakens." So they have been cut off by the Boxer Wars with all the drugs, and the relationship between the drugs and the silver, and we could go into that for 2 hours. So I think in a memory of China, they know very well what it means to be subdued to a new world order, and they want to have their own world order. That's what I think.
I see. So now to individual freedom, and also maybe talk a little bit about the spiritual aspect of economics, the balance between spiritualism and mammon, which is like money. Could we go into that? Because I heard you speaking to Philip, and it was really interesting, and I thought my viewers would like to hear from you about that.
Yeah, well, it's a very broad subject, of course, but if you think about value, why does something have value? This is the economic question. If you can answer that question correctly, then all of the policies that you need to have a flourishing economy can follow from that. That is the basic question. And you could say, well, value is intrinsic. Because an apple has a nutritional value, I can feed myself and I will stay alive. And then there are those are the objectivists. They say, no, there is an objective reality out there that objectively helps me. I am not such a person. I am a subjectivist, which means that my take on things is that value is entirely 100% what people believe it is. And that is a spiritual insight. I will give an example because we have to remain practical. If you go to metaphysics, it's all very blurry. Take, for instance, the concepts of scarcity. Petroleum is scarce. Okay, I am in the process of writing a paper denying that scarcity exists, and I base myself on the wager that Julian Simon had with Ehrlich in the 70s, and it's a book I can recommend to anybody, and it's called The Ultimate Resource. So all resources are finite, and an objectivist would say, hey, that is why we have wars, and there's only so much, and that the whole Malthusian idea that if the population rises too fast, then we will not have resources enough, that whole idea, that is also all based on metaphysical assumptions, and the metaphysical assumption behind that is that scarcity exists. Now, what did Julian Simon say? The ultimate resource is the human mind. For instance, creativity. For instance, I have been hearing, I'm 40 years old in September, I have been hearing for 20 years that in 20 years, there will not be enough petroleum for all the cars. But during those 20 years, motors have become so efficient that, you know, a Humvee that was using 25 liters 20 years ago now runs on 5 liters. And also the transition of technology makes it so that a resource that was considered finite is needed less. So it's a very subjective thing, you know. But if you don't go into metaphysics in your most basic assumptions about reality, you cannot understand these things. And that is why I always stress, the followers that I have, I always stress that look at your assumptions by which you analyze reality. And that is the link between the theoretical link between metaphysics and economics. And now the practical link when it comes to the monetary system, if you apply that to money, then you start understanding that the value of money is also not determined by the gold in the bank, but determined by the faith that people have that this money will have value tomorrow. And this is true for all money. Like, why does gold have value? Because people believe that it will have value tomorrow, nothing else. If you really think about it, because gold, even on an industrial level, it has very few applications. Warren Buffett once said, gold is the stupidest investment you can make. You dig it out of the ground and then you put it back into a vault. So there's no practical use for it, and still it has value. Why? It is a faith-based. So value is based on the belief that it will have value tomorrow, and the monetary system knows that. So if they can engender a belief in people that fiat money has value, although there's nothing behind it, not even collateral. Since 15th of August 1974, there is no collateral whatsoever. If people can make that believe that, then it will have value. And so, but this is, you know, and how do you say that? This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And as long as the self-fulfilling prophecy delivers, then it can go on. But the problem is that it doesn't deliver anymore. The economy is being hollowed out. And so one day, this bubble where we are in will be a crisis of metaphysical proportions, that the whole idea people have about reality will vanish in one moment. And so then they will totally have to reorient themselves. And in my Macrotrends followers, I always say we are investors, but whatever is true for life is also true for investing. So you really have to question yourself. You have to become a better person. You have to become more conscious about what is really valuable in life. And, you know, I could go on talking about this for an hour, but I don't know if I'm covering the subject that you want to talk about.
Yeah. Can you explain to the viewers metaphysics, what it really means?
Okay. So the word meta actually means above and beyond. Behind, before, under, it means everywhere, basically. And physics, that which is material. So metaphysics is about the ungraspable, about the unprovable. For instance, let's go for the most difficult subject there is. I cannot do it in any other way because all other subjects are derived from that. Logic. For instance, logic, people see it as the method to eliminate contradictions. And modernism, positivism, above all, says that whatever cannot be proven logically does not exist, okay, or is not valid. And then the most basic question any thinking person can ask is, well, if that is true, that is one thing. If that is true, then how do you prove the validity of logic? This is a metaphysical question. There are only two answers. Either you can prove it through logic, but then you are in a circular reasoning. You try to prove the validity of logic using logic. So that in any logical system, even the most modern, postmodernist modal logical systems, that is an invalid way to think about it. Or you have to recognize that nothing can prove the validity of logic. And in that case, the whole modern idea about logic also evaporates. So any way you take, you have to acknowledge, like Kant did, that the limits of logical reasoning, that logical reasoning is very, very limited. And that mostly what we believe to be proven logically is just a confirmation of what we already believed. That's the confirmation bias. And this is one of the most dangerous things in investing, to fall in love with your investment and you only look at that which already confirms what you were feeling and wanting. And that is why metaphysics and investing are, for me, they are one.
I see. And what about what's been happening in the last year, more than a year now, with the crisis, and about how you think people should, if they should really fight or protest about the loss of freedoms? Can you give your thought on that? Because you spoke about that with Philip, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is a strategic question, of course. How are we going to fight this system? And again, speaking from my metaphysical cap, if you fight the system, you actually legitimize it. This is very paradoxical. So what I fear, for instance, is that people will take to the streets, and then it's very easy for the government to pay some hooligans, and we know that this exists, black boxes, for instance. And then they have an excuse, of course, to use more force and to vote more laws that will limit our freedom. So we are like in this catch-22 that whenever you try to fight the system, you are actually losing. So, but then people ask me, if we don't fight the system will come after us and be more dictatorial ever more. And that is true, of course. But the real art is to not enter into dualism. And I will try to explain it as best as I can, because it's not easy. If let's say, for instance, if you protest against something, you are giving it energy. Negative energy multiplied by negative energy will only reinforce itself. What you should be able to do is to let the system use aggression against you and suffer. And it is the suffering of one person that can awaken another person. As long as you are in logical debates, logic is of the ego. And so, for instance, like people who are protesting against the vaccination passport, this is a logical protest because they logically do not agree. And then the police cracks some skulls, and then it's easy for the other side to say, you shouldn't even go to the streets because the government has forbidden it, and you don't reach anybody. But for instance, my dream, and it might be a dream that it can only be realized in 100 years, is that people would start realizing that paying taxes for a system that actually oppresses them has no legitimacy whatsoever. So if you stop paying taxes, that is the key issue. They don't care about liberties, they don't care about philosophy, they don't care about ideology. They care about the cash flow that they can get out of the slave system. If you stop paying taxes, you're not fighting the system. You're just saying, I don't want to participate in this anymore. That's not dualism. And then you oblige the system to come after you. And of course, if one person would do that, they would just break his life, and that would be the end of it. But if you do that collectively, I will give a very crystal clear example of that. Here in Spain, in the year 2011, when Greece was in dire straits, that was like the first, after 2008, the first little crisis that came back. I think it was Pujol at that time, the president of Catalonia, said Barcelona is not going to pay for Madrid, speaking about the sovereign debt. Immediately, the spread between Spanish debt and German debt went up. I think it went up 13 points. So 13% overnight. And then, of course, Pujol could go to Rajoy to have a coffee because he had leverage. If you have, that made me think, even if you would still pay your taxes, but unite in an association declaring that the 1st of May, 2030, we will stop paying taxes, even that is just, the financial markets, if they would see that would be enough to just, kill the states. And then, of course, the state would come after you. And then what would be the reaction? You would have to permit the suffering, because it's the suffering of somebody who has done nothing wrong that awakens other people. because there's a lot of aggression now, but it's covert aggression. You cannot even pinpoint it. But the moment the state has to come out of its discourse and really use aggression, then it's visible. And so this is the difference between bourgeoisie that is voting in the parliament, and we will vote for less taxes. This is bullshit. I'm sorry, pardon my language. What we need is aristocracy, people who are willing to suffer for freedom. And if people see that a leader is really willing to suffer for freedom, they will be awakened. They will not just awaken, they will stand up, because that is a big difference. You can lie in your bed and be awake, but if you see no reason to get up, you stay in bed. And most people think that people are not awake. I think a lot of people are awake about what is happening, but they just don't see an alternative. So I don't know if this answers your question a bit.
Yeah, I mean, today, for example, is the election for London mayor. And I remember when I came to London in 1992, there was no London mayor. And I think it was in 1997 or 99 that they brought the post of London mayor. And London was fine without a mayor. So I could have gone to vote today, and it's very near my house. But I decided not to, because by voting for this layer of government and more taxation, you're actually legitimizing it as well. So, yeah. And you spoke about aristocracy, that we should have aristocratic leaders. And by that, you don't mean the royals or anything. You mean, no. Can you go into the origin of the word? And also, there's an Austrian school of economics writer. His name is Hans Hermann Hoppe. He's German. He's written a book about how democracy is a god that has failed. Do you want to dig into that a little bit? Or
this is basic reading for any. When I say, for instance, that I'm not a Democrat, people, the first reaction is, "What are you, a fascist?" Then they have been so brainwashed that they only see those two alternatives. But the idea, for instance, that there is a natural order of the best. So the aristes is Greek for the best people. And what is meant by the best people? Not a technocracy, because we could have. That's what we have now. Don't say that people who are in government are fools. They're really intelligent people. But the best on a personal level, the best to be able to judge situations, the best integrity, the best decisions they make long term. And what Hans Hermann Hoppe talks about in his book is that when you have to choose between democracy as a system and aristocracy as a system, on a purely economical level, so without political philosophy even, but purely about externalizing costs and internalizing costs, aristocracy is better. Why? Because democracy works with terms, 4 or 5 years, and if a politician wants to be elected, this is not an elitist thing. It's the obverse. It's you have to capture as many people behind you. And how do you do that? Well, by buying votes. You buy votes, you propose, we are going to raise pensions by 5%, for instance, or 10%. Of course, you will get a lot of people, unthinking people, of course, because nobody asks for the cost behind you. Okay, what happens? These policies are implemented, but there is a disregard for the long-term effects of these policies. Why? Because this guy doesn't even know if he will be re-elected next term. So he can externalize the cost of his decisions to the future and internalize the benefits for him personally in this short term. If a monarch does that, for instance, if he would, make policies that are unsustainable, like for instance subsidies for solar and for wind turbines, now we are paying the interest on those decisions of 20 years ago. If he would do that, who would find the misery? Who would find the problems? Well, very obviously his son. So it would be an act of egoism towards his own family to enact policies that are detrimental on the long term. And this is a concept in Austrian economics which is called time preference. Time preference. So democracy lowers the time preference. Everything has to be now, because I'm not sure that I will be re-elected. And the news cycles, for instance, a news cycle 100 years ago could be a month. News cycles now are 3 hours. So everything it destroys capital. And if you want to build capital on the long term, what you need is a different system, which is monarchy. And we can talk about monarchy, of course, because my idea about monarchy before I read Hans was the Louis XIV kind of monarchy. But that is already, you have to think in terms of King Arthur, that kind of monarchy. Briefly.
That's very interesting. So how would it work then if we went to a system like that? And how would you convince people? Because most people nowadays think of monarchy and royalty as a waste of time. And democracy is most like a god nowadays, the state.
Yeah. Well, people are absolutely right that monarchy nowadays is a waste of time because they are not real monarchs. They are, paper figures put there by central bankers. I will give you the clearest example that there is in the world, and that is from my country, Belgium. Belgium was founded with 100,000 gold francs, and by, I don't know which Rothschild it was, but it was the Rothschild dynasty. That is a real dynasty, for instance, but a diabolic dynasty. And they bought a king, and his name was Leopold I of Belgium. And they had several slave plantations. They had the Greek slave plantation. They had the Belgian slave plantation. And, at that time, Leopold the First of Belgium was the crown prince of Britain. He was married to, I think her name was Josephine Charlotte, but I'm not sure. Should look it up. And that lady died. And so in his matrimonial agreement, he, if in the case she died, he had negotiated, because he was a very poor prince from Saxon-Coburg, were the poorest princes of Germany. They had enormous lots of debts, and it's there that the Rothschilds go pick up their monarchs, which are not sovereign, they are debt slaves, and then they say, you can become a king, but you will do what we say. So he negotiated with her a very, very, very rich pension in case she died. And so the Rothschilds had to convince him that, to leave that pension, that his profits would be greater if he would want to be king of Belgium. And so the financing of Congo, for instance, which was his personal territory, Congo was not a colony of Belgium. Congo was the personal territory of Leopold I. And this was all one package deal, So these are not kings. These are not sovereign people. They were debt slaves that have been converted into being something like a king. And that is true for all European monarchies. Here in Spain, it's the Bourbons. They're not even Spanish. They're French, and they are like these puppets because the central bankers know that people are ruled not by words and concepts, but by symbols and archetypes. So the figure of a king, like my granny, is a very wise person, but she has a box of biscuits where the royal family is on. This is very important psychologically. So, and they know that and they use that. So if you think about monarchy that way, of course, it's a waste of time. But there's another, if you want to ask a question, because if you do not ask a question, I will keep talking.
No, keep going. You're going to say there's another way, I guess.
Yes, there's another way. I have organized a study day in 2017, and I called it The Return of the King. Because the king has to return. I don't know if he's born yet, but we have to prepare the field. The real question is, if we would have a monarchy, what control can we exert on that monarch not becoming a new tyrant? Because there's no use in shifting from democracy to monarchy if we have the same oppressive regime. So I was thinking about the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, because I'm a Catholic, and I thought maybe in power, we also need three powers that, the trias politica, the modern trias politica is the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch, which is a joke, because this has been proposed by Rousseau. And Rousseau, I don't know if you have read it in your books, he was very well known in Venice. So he took his cues from the Venetian bankers. And this is a false trinity, a false trias politica. Why? Because all of those three powers, they have to be united in one person, and that is the king. And then you would say, well, if the king is lawgiver and judge, that is total autocracy, that is total dictatorship. And I say no, total dictatorship, there are three real sources of power. There is the material source of power, which I call the physical source of power, literally being able to hurt somebody. That's the military source of power. Then you have the spiritual source of power, being able to convince somebody of an idea. You know, people have killed each other for ideas, so there's a lot of power there. And then the third source of power is money, pure commercial power. Okay, so if you look at if you take monarchy as one of those three powers, namely the military physical power to judge and to hurt if necessary, to use violence if necessary, because the usage of violence is not all in all bad if it maintains a certain order, but we can go into that later. How is the king controlled? The new trias politica that I see is that the king can be deposed by the people. And so that is the real meaning of democracy to my mind. Now, what is democracy? Democracy is now positivist. We elect who is going to rob from us in the next 5 years. That is not the original meaning of democracy to my mind. It requires a little bit of interpretation, but if you look at the Greek polis, for instance, you had a technique called ostracism. You took an amphora, you shred it to pieces, and on the pieces, if you thought somebody was too much of a tyrant, you put his name. And if his name came up too much, he was banned from politics for 2 or 5 or 10 years, okay? What happens now? There's a political scandal. A politician has to leave his position. That's what they call taking responsibility. He took his responsibility. That's when he goes away. So that's very ironical. But then what happens? He goes to work for 10 years in some corporate, and then he goes back into politics because the masses have forgotten. If you make ostracism the definition of democracy, and somebody is banned for life from public holding public office, this is a very strong way to oust a tyrant. And then the next question, of course, is, okay, now we have a negative mechanism to oust a tyrant. How do we appoint a new king? Well, there we also have a historical precedent. In Germany, you had something called the Kurfürst. So if you go to Berlin, one of the most beautiful boulevards is called the Kurfürsterdamm. So this means that the king was not elected. That would be a contradiction in terms, because elections are something democratically. No, he was selected. And he was selected by a council of elders. So that is the spiritual power. And so when the commercial power, because I have to explain something more, so I'm very sorry, a little.
That's okay.
If you want to oust a king, then you have to aggregate democratic potential. And the only people that have the power to aggregate democratic potential is the commercial power. You will have bourgeois. If he's really a tyrant, for instance, he will impose taxes on them. And it's the bourgeois. They do have a function. I'm not against bourgeois, but they have to know their place. They will have the commercial, the money, the capital, to oust the king. But to replace them, we can never allow that the money owners choose the king, because then you are buying a king, what the Rothschilds are doing now. You have to leave it to the spiritual power, and those are the people that have the highest integrity. And if they are not integer, if they don't have integrity, everything is lost. So that is a real trias politica, the new trias politica, and I'm convinced that is a matter of time before people will start realizing that the idea of a king, modern kings like Louis XIV, is not the reference. The reference is King Arthur, and there is a reason why Henry the Eighth destroyed. I think it was Salisbury, or how was in 1535 he destroyed the monastery where the legend of King Arthur was taking place, and this is psychological warfare from before. But I will finish now. This is what I see for the future.
Yeah, and from reading a lot of history and of kings, one thing that I thought was that the king is like the top sovereign, and that his subjects are all sovereigns as well.
Yes.
And the king is supposed to protect us as sovereign. But nowadays, Queen Elizabeth or the king in Belgium, they don't care about the individual, because if they did, they'd be screaming murder to what's happening to us in the last 14 months.
Yeah, they are not kings. They are not monarchs. They are not aristocracy. They are a diabolic, false representation of aristocracy.
Yeah.
And true aristocracy is with people who have enough capital. If all your basic needs are fulfilled, you have a nice apartment, you have your wife, your car, everything, every material need that you can possibly have, a true bourgeois thinks, now I have arrived. No, that's when it starts, my friend. Now you have to walk the aristocratic steps and use your capital. With capital comes responsibility to protect the weaker persons who are not yet sovereign. Whenever in your life you can make somebody sovereign in any way, moral or financial, then you have really done God's work. That's how I see it.
That's very good. So let's move over to things that are happening a little bit nowadays, like with money, government, inflation, precious metals. And, I hear that the central banks now are talking about tapering. I saw that the Bank of Canada, for example, they've dropped their QE from 4 billion a week to 3 billion. The Bank of England is coming out now saying they might have to think about tapering. The Fed, I don't think they will. And from learning history, from reading about history and inflation, when you get on the path of inflation, like they did in France with the assignats in the 1790s, I don't see a way out, because every time they tried in France to pare back, the economy went into a contraction, and then they had to issue even more paper. So where do you think we are right now in terms of that? And I know that you've spoken about how QE actually creates a deflationary environment for the economy, but it's not as simple, because yes, the economy in Europe, for example, is not doing great because of all the zero or negative interest rates in the QE. But at the same time, the cost of living is rising, and the currency is becoming worth less and less. We've seen commodities starting to move up. They have a lot of room on the upside. Yeah,
well, a lot of topics you are touching there. Of course, if as long as there is no inflation, central bankers can do pretty much anything they want. And now, of course, the cat is out of the bag. You cannot put toothpaste back in a tube. It's impossible. So the tapering measures, going down from 4 billion a week to 3 billion a week, that's just isn't it? It's like we'll cut down 25% of what we are extra printing. It's like, I was taking 4 pills of ecstasy and now I'm only taking 3. This isn't cool. So and it's very clear that any tapering, any returning conservatism is hypocritical. Is that they cannot go back. If they go back, they get a crisis, and they don't want the crisis. Maybe they do want a crisis. That is something I contemplate, because the thing is, they know that this cannot go on forever, so a crisis must come. And so the best way to be able to manage that crisis is when you can plan it. And it's not very hard to plan a crisis. Do what they did in 29, call in all the loans, and you have a crisis. So maybe one of the scenarios they have is we'll let this go on until all our positions are filled, and then we will provoke it ourselves. That is one option. The other option might be what the Davos crowd is planning, which is, in 2030, you will own nothing and you will be very happy. Maybe we will go full force into, dumbing down the population. If I look at the debates, for instance, about corona, a virus that lets 99.98% of the people live, and that 0.02% are people more than 70 with comorbidities. I don't have to convince anybody that this is just the real wool that has been put over our eyes, because it's the monetary system that is crashing. And so they need an excuse, So, but on a purely economical level, what is happening? If you inject money into the into the economy. There is this axiom within Austrian economics, and it's the non-neutrality of money, which means that these injections do not get at the same persons, do not get equally at everybody. It gets first. It's the Cantillon effect. First, it's like taking a glass of milk, and you pour a glass of water. So the water does not enter below. It does not enter on the side. It enters on top. So it comes into the economy in the investment funds. Those investment funds loan to the multinationals. Those multinationals have subcontractors, and that way it trickles down. But of course, if you are the receiver of the last monetary unit, while the prices have already gone up, then you lose buying power. And so what is happening is that the middle class, not the poorest classes, because they are maintained by the government, and not the richest classes, because they don't pay taxes, but the fiscal milking cow of any monetary system, the middle class, is being decimated. Or you go up to the 1%, or you go down to the poor slums, and this is what we are going to see. And so inflation, if it were only rising prices, that would be beautiful, but it's not just that. It's just killing the middle class, and that is where the real crisis will come. Crisis krinein. Those people will start to realize that they have been had, and it's happening right now. Like they call it populism. In Spain here, Vox has risen tremendously, and if you look at Vox as a political movement, it's an anti-movement. They are not even well organized, but they still get votes because people are starting to realize that they have been had. So I don't know what to comment more, but they will not be able to rescue the economy. It's too late for that. And everybody that is looking at your channel, which is one of the best channels in my mind, have to buy precious metals. That is the basis. That has to be the basis of your portfolio.
Yes, and could you go into that a little more, aside from the precious metals, the strategy also about debt and paying off debt? And just to let the viewers know, this is Brecht's opinion. It's not financial advice, right, Brecht?
No.
So if you could go, aside from buying gold and silver, what are you recommending, and what are the best strategies?
Yeah. Even before buying gold and silver, you have to have first to pay off your debt. You cannot call yourself an investor if you have debt. I have several new subscribers, and they say, "Well, I have 200,000 euros in debt, and I have 300,000, or I have 150,000 in stocks and bonds and gold coins." And I say, "No, you don't have anything. You have 50,000 in debt." So the first strategy is to free up cash flow. So I'm not saying that you should pay off your debt right away. You have to have the money to be able to do so, and nobody has it. Otherwise, you would not have, contracted a loan. But what you can do is to spread out your loan, for instance, over more years. Take a fixed rate, not a variable rate, because that is lower, but a lot more risk. Because if the things go haywire, we will have double digits interest rates, and then you're just a debt slave for the rest of your life. So, on a longer term, stretching it the farthest as you can, you fix the interest rate, very important, and then anytime that you have a financial a good month, or there's something happens that, for instance, in the family, 2,000 or 3,000 euros is given to each child. This happens sometimes. You always put it in paying off the debt. Why? Because this frees up cash flow. And this is very important psychologically. Like if you have to pay 1,000 euros, many people have to pay 1,000 euros a month to pay off the mortgage. If you can free up 200 of that 1,000 euros by extending the loan, by putting it fixed, then you have 200 euros more income each month. And that you can use to invest. I'm not against that. And if you are lucky in your investments, you go back to your loan and you lower it to 700 a month. And it's a battle. It's really a battle for sovereignty. And I can assure you, I have helped a lot of people paying off their debt. And the day your debt is paid off, it's psychologically, it's a totally different world. You estimate risk differently. You start valuing things differently, because if you have a debt every month, you you don't speak out so much as you would like to, because if you lose your job, it's a problem. Being sovereign is being able to take care of yourself. And so we're not even talking about precious metals. That is a technique to pay off your debt. But that paying off the debt is the first priority of anybody who would want to take the aristocratic path.
Yeah, and counterparty risk is really important as well, isn't it? Because bankers can change the rules. But if you're holding one of these, which is a crown, Victorian crown, there's no rules. It's just a piece of value.
Yeah, you have to think in terms of how to say this. Everything is based on convention in the end. And conventions are not written in stone. They are cultural institutions. And if you look at the culture is just crumbling. Honoring your word is, will become more and more difficult because people will think more and more short term. And I have clients, for instance, who think that they are smart and they say, Brecht, I'm going to lend money, a lot of it, because interest rates are low. And then like in Weimar, we will have hyperinflation and I will pay off my debt with the hyperinflated money. And that looks logical from a first sight. But if you read about that period, very little people know, very few people know that the German government, after the hyperinflation, re-indexed the loans. They re-indexed them to the new currency. And this was like, that generation were debt slaves for the rest of their life. So my message is, don't play around with debt. Debt is literally enslaving you. And this has to be the first priority for everybody. Get rid of your debt. I don't care how you do it. You can even emit bonds so that your neighbors help you. You pay off the bank. Then at least you have a debt with your neighbors, which are people who can share your values. But the bank doesn't share your values. The bank sees you as just a number.
Great. To finish off, could we go over what you said that was like the epiphany for you? I think it was it 2013, about being truthful to yourself. And I found as well for my channel, when I started out in 2016, early 2016, I had doubts. I thought, should I really talk about these things? What will people think? And then I told myself, I'm just going to speak my mind and what I believe to be true. And it's actually, of course, it's taken a long time to build my channel, and I'm sure a lot of people are put off by what I say, but a lot of people like what I say. And it's been a revelation to me as well, how many people value what I say. So we'll finish on that note.
Yeah, you should never, ever worry about what people will think about you, because if you do that, you're being too democratic. You are catering to the biggest part of the market that you could conquer. And you have to create your own market. You have to be true to yourself. Mario Ineco is a person with a lot of experience, a lot of thought. And if you put that into the market, you will attract the right people. But talking about yourself, or about finding yourself and all those issues, spiritual issues, is a very, very intimate thing to do, because this is a story about how you conquered your own, deficiencies, and nobody wants to, admit that they were lesser persons in the past, for instance. So coming to terms with your own history and then even talking about it to other people, that is one of the most courageous things you can do. And actually Lao Tse said that the most beautiful thing you can offer to the world is your own transformation. So as a video blogger and as a channel host, I can only encourage that you open up about your own personal history, although you might say, who would ever be interested in that? But let's remember what I said about suffering. It's through the suffering that you went through that people will identify, not just with the channel and talking about economics and gold and stuff, but with their own personal path. And if you can do that, you will be one of the greatest talk show hosts that we will see in the next 10 years.
Thank you very much. So Brecht, I don't think we're going to wait another 13 months to talk again. Hopefully you'll be able to come back again on the channel. And can you just tell the viewers maybe where they can find your work, even though you do a lot of your work in Dutch, right?
Yes, I'm currently I'm still finishing my PhD, and this prevents me from really going into the English speaking market. But the moment I finish this big work, it's a lot of work. I will have the room to start the space to start talking in English more. This is I only do videos with you and with Philip, but I plan to do more of them. And if people would want to talk, see some of my philosophy, I can give you a link of a talk I gave 4 years ago. That might be something inspiring for them. So, but to follow my work in English, I don't have that much. I have articles, but they might be boring for some people.
Yeah, for my viewers in Holland and Belgium, Brecht's website, macrotrends.be. I think after the US, UK, Canada, and Australia, I think the Netherlands is number 5 in terms of my demographics. So there you go.
Yeah,
all right.
I've been promoting your videos as well. So
thank you very much. And maybe one day we'll be able to hold that conference, be it in Breda or somewhere else. I'd look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, same here, man. Same here.
Thank you, and I'll talk to you later. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.